By April of 1945, Berlin was a ghost town. Constant shelling from Soviet artillery transformed neighborhoods into fields of rubble as buildings crumbled under the bombardment. Desperate civilians sought refuge in basements, hoping to survive the onslaught. Soldiers fought amidst the ruins, clinging to what was left of the city. The government of the Third Reich, once a symbol of power, had retreated into the depths of the earth. Deep beneath the shattered Reich Chancellery was the Führerbunker. It was a tangled web of concrete hallways and rooms. The last of Hitler's closest people lived, still trying to believe that their government was real. But what happened in those final days wasn't loyalty. It was the slow end of a world built on lies and fear. When Hitler went to the bunker in January 1945, he fooled himself by believing that Berlin would be like a reverse Stalingrad. He thought Berlin would hold out, that armies would come to save the day, and that he would somehow be spared. His followers played along with these ideas, each for their own reasons. Martin Bormann, always watching the door, controlled all the messages that came in. Goebbels pretended that everyone still supported Hitler. Generals showed maps of armies that didn't exist anymore. But underneath it all, the thing that had once held them together was gone. The bunker felt small and stuffy. Water dripped down the walls. The air smelled like fuel and sweat, and the lights were always on. Outside, the gardens around the Chancellery were covered in debris. Every day, more people arrived. Secretaries, agitators, SS guards, and officers all thought that being close to Hitler would keep them safe. But every day, others slipped away. They tried to escape west before the Soviets closed off the city. It was a court in its final moments, where every conversation had an accusatory tone. Bormann controlled the bunker with his usual force. He decided who got to see Hitler and controlled the food, fuel, and beds based on rank. He hated his rival ministers even more as things got worse. He couldn't stand Goebbels' dramatic speeches and didn't trust Himmler. Himmler wasn't in Berlin very often. He had started to distance himself from Hitler, traveling between northern Germany and occupied Denmark, making secret deals with Count Volker Bernadotte. He hoped to give up to the Western Allies and save himself. When word of these talks reached Berlin, Bormann made sure Hitler knew about it. Hitler was furious. Himmler was called a traitor, and his name was removed from everything. Inside the bunker, Bormann had more power than ever. But outside, the empire he said he represented was gone. Goebbels stayed close to Hitler until the very end. He viewed the war not as a military thing, but as a fight that had to end in death. His wife, Magda, felt the same way. She told the secretaries that life without Hitler wasn't worth living. They planned to die together, but not before making sure their children wouldn't live in a world without their thinking. Their calmness bothered others in the bunker. Even as bombs exploded above them, Goebbels kept making up stories about counterattacks and backup. The generals didn't believe any of it anymore. Wilhelm Burgdorf, the army personnel head, and Hans Krebs, the chief of staff, acted like they were in control, but they both knew the end was near. They drank a lot, going back and forth between giving up and anger. Krebs still called Hitler my Führer, but whispered to others that there was no help. When Hitler asked Field Marshal Kittel to send backup from divisions that didn't exist, Krebs wrote the order, but then hid it away. The bunker had become a place of lies where talking replaced action. Outside the Chancellery, parts of Hitler's government tried to run. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, stationed at Flensburg near the Danish border, started acting like he would soon be in charge. Hitler had made him head of the Navy, but Donitz was already thinking about what would happen after the war. He surrounded himself with officers who thought Germany should give up to the Western Allies, but keep fighting the Soviets. He sent messages to Berlin offering to take over in Hitler's name if they lost communication. He was planning to take over. Bormann read these messages and said Donitz was too ambitious. Farther south, Hermann Goering, who had been pushed aside and was addicted to drugs, still thought he should be Hitler's replacement. On April 23rd, he sent a message from his place asking if he should take over based on Hitler's 1941 order that named him heir. It didn't work. Bormann showed the message to Hitler as proof of a takeover. Hitler exploded, took away all of Goering's titles, and told them to arrest him. Goering had been the second most powerful man in the Reich for years. Now he was a prisoner in his own home. This showed how much Bormann had turned Hitler against even his oldest friends. Inside the bunker, news of Goering's arrest spread fast. Some were happy. Others saw it as another sign that the government was falling apart. Goebbels sided with Hitler, calling Goering a bad person but secretly admitting that the government was destroying itself in paranoia. In the hallways, the secretaries whispered that Himmler would be next. They were right. When word came that he had tried to talk with the Allies, Hitler was angrier than he had been with Goering. He said to arrest Himmler, but no one in the bunker could do it. The Reich's second and third most powerful men had both been called traitors within the same week. As April ended, the sound of artillery was constant. The Soviet guns were only a few miles away. Hitler spent most of his time in the map room, staring at places that no longer existed. He wouldn't leave the city or think about giving up. Those around him started planning their own escapes. Bormann arranged for a small group of SS officers to get vehicles ready for a run to the north. He told messengers to take messages to Donitz, saying that Hitler had chosen him to take over. At the same time, he kept the last of the bunker's fuel and food for his own group. When others asked to join the convoy, he said there was no room. Goebbels said he wouldn't leave. He said his family would share Hitler's fate. Hitler liked this devotion and thanked him. To him, Goebbels' willingness to die showed that some true loyalty was still there. For the others, it was crazy. Secretaries remembered that Magda Goebbels became calm, reading to her children while bombs shook the walls. Things broke on April 29th. News came that Benito Mussolini and his mistress had been caught and killed by Italian fighters. Their bodies had been hung upside down in a public square in Milan. The photographs were secretly brought into Berlin. When Hitler saw them, he turned pale. He promised that he would never let himself be shown in that way. That night, he wrote his political statement. In it, he kicked Goering and Himmler out of the party, made Donitz his replacement, and named Goebbels head. Bormann was kept as party minister. The paper was a last try to bring order to everything, but it also kept the battles in place. Each man now had a claim to power, but none could use it. On April 30th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a quick service inside the bunker. After, he gathered his staff and gave his last orders. He thanked them, shook hands, and went to his private rooms. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, a gunshot was heard. The guards found him dead next to Eva Braun, who had taken poison. His body was taken to the garden, covered in gas, and burned. Those who saw it said little. The service was normal, almost. In that moment, the world that had circled around one man was gone. What followed was chaos. Bormann said that Hitler's statement had to be carried out. He made Goebbels head of government, Krebs chief of staff, and himself the connection to Donitz. But even as he gave orders, Soviet bombs were exploding above. Communication with the outside world was breaking down. Krebs tried to reach General Vasily Chukov of the Soviet forces to talk about a ceasefire, but he didn't have the power to give up. The meeting did nothing. Goebbels said only Donitz could talk. Bormann said Donitz had to first see his power. Each was acting for power in a government that wasn't really running anything. That night, Goebbels gathered his family. He and Magda gave their 6 children drugs to make them sleep, then put poison in their mouths. They left their bodies in their beds. Soon after, Goebbels and his wife walked into the garden where an SS guard shot them both. Their bodies were burned next to the same pit where Hitler had been burned the day before. Bormann, now the highest-ranking person left alive in Berlin, planned to run. He gathered a group of SS officers, agitators, and secretaries. They packed documents, weapons, and poison. At midnight on May 1st, they tried to break out of the bunker. The group moved through the destroyed streets, following the subway tunnels and ruins toward the Vidandima Bridge. Bombs lit up the night sky. Soviet soldiers fired at any movement. Some were killed, others ran. Bormann was last seen near the bridge, walking through the darkness with a friend. People later said that he bit his poison pill as tanks got closer. His body was never found. In the north, Donitz got the message naming him Hitler's replacement. It had been sneaked out before the escape. He quickly formed a new government at Flensburg, acting like he was there to bring things together and would only give up to the Western Allies. He was in charge of nothing more than a piece of the old navy and some offices when word of Hitler's death came out. Donitz said there would be a time of sadness and promised to keep fighting to save the German people. Within a week, he was making plans to give up. For the men and women who had been in Hitler's bunker, surviving was based on luck. Some secretaries were caught by the Soviets. Others ran to the west and were asked questions later. Krebs and Bergdorf, knowing they couldn't give up, shot themselves in their offices. The guards ran into the ruins, many of them killed in fights with Soviet troops. By the time the Red Army raised its flag over the Reichstag on May 2nd, the leadership of the Third Reich was gone. The fall of unity among the Nazi leaders in those final days showed what the government had always been: a group of selfish people held together by fear of the man who was now gone. Once that fear was gone, the whole thing fell apart. Ambition, self-preservation, and extreme views replaced loyalty. Some tried to escape, others tried to die and be remembered, and some held on to the idea that the war might keep going. What was left in the bunker after their deaths was like the entire Reich, a world kept alive by lies until reality came crashing in. The men who had ruled Europe ended their lives hiding underground, arguing over fake orders, while the empire above them burned. Their unity, once shown through rallies and parades, turned into distrust and death. In the final hours, there was no Führer, no cabinet, no army, just pieces of a dying government, each trying to escape the results of the world they had made. When the Soviets finally entered the bunker, they found burned bodies, documents, and the remains of meals. On the walls, maps still showed fronts that didn't exist anymore. The war had moved on, but inside those walls, time had stopped. For the men and women who had promised loyalty, the fall of their unity was total. The empire that promised 1,000 years had ended in 12, and its final act was one of betrayal, denial,